There is a doorway inside the Vatican that you will never pass through. Not a music, because it's watched, though it is. Not because it's concealed, though most tourists never learn it's there. It's because the door has been walled up, sealed tight, shut with a permanence that speaks not of repairs or of temporary closure, but of total erasure. The kind of finality that says, whatever lies behind this wall is not meant for you or anyone ever again. I came across it. Or rather, I came across mentions of it while digging into the architectural history of Vatican City. Not the polished public story, the guided tours, the lavish coffee, table books, the dramatic documentaries about the Sistine Chapel ceiling, but the structural history, the engineering files, the construction logs that reveal not what the Vatican looks like today, but what it rests upon. And what it rests upon is a maze beneath St. Peter's Basilica, beneath the Vatican museums, beneath the Apostolic Palace, beneath the gardens, courtyards, and office buildings that make up the world's smallest sovereign state. A network of tunnels, chambers, passages, and underground spaces whose full scope has never been publicly mapped. Some of these spaces are familiar. The Vatican Necropolis, an ancient Roman cemetery uncovered under St. Peter's during 1940s excavations, is partially open to small tour groups by special arrangement. The scavi, the deeper archaeological layers under the necropolis, have been partly excavated and researched. The Vatican grottos, between the Basilica floor and the necropolis, are open to visitors. But these known areas, the ones the Vatican permits you to see, are only a tiny piece of what exists below. The rest, the sealed corridors, the bricked over entrances, the tunnels that show up on old architectural drawings but vanish from modern maps, the rooms that excavation crews have stumbled upon and then been ordered to leave unrecorded. These remain shut, not temporarily, not while further study is planned, permanently, with a permanence that, in some instances, has been preserved for more than 3 centuries. That raises a simple but crucial question: what needs to stay sealed for 300 years straight? The Vatican's official stance on its underground spaces isn't denial. It's silence. It doesn't claim the tunnels don't exist. It just doesn't talk about them. Requests to enter underground zones beyond the official tour paths are turned down with no explanation. Academic queries about the full subterranean network get redirected to publish materials that only cover the already known sections. The architectural blueprints of Vatican City, to the degree they exist in accessible form, detail the above ground structures thoroughly, but treat the underground as if it were solid rock. The silence was overwhelming. Start with what we do know about the ground beneath the Vatican, because the earth itself tells a story that the institution above has spent centuries trying to manage. Vatican Hill, the rise on the Tiber's western bank, where St. Peter's now stands, wasn't originally Christian ground. It was a Roman necropolis, a city of the dead, a vast cemetery in use for centuries before Christianity arose. The Romans buried their dead there, built elaborate mausoleums, constructed underground tomb complexes that cut deep into the hillside. When Constantine built the first St. Peter's Basilica in the 4th century, he built it directly atop that necropolis, not beside it, but over it. The tombs were partly filled with earth to create a level foundation, and the basilica rose above the buried dead. That much is documented. That much the Vatican admits. But here's what the records reveal when you read them carefully. The necropolis uncovered in the 1940s, the one tourists can visit, represents only a small part of a much larger burial complex. The excavations were carried out under Pope Pius XI, ostensibly to find the tomb of St. Peter himself. A goal that was achieved, or at least declared achieved. When bones were discovered beneath the high altar, that the Vatican identified as Peter's remains. But the excavation reports that were published describe encountering passages and chambers that stretched beyond the excavation zone, passages that were noted, measured at their openings, and then sealed. Not excavated, sealed. Go read those published reports yourself. They're in academic libraries. The language is careful, clinical, bureaucratic. Yet between the technical descriptions of stratigraphy and artifact recovery, there are references to additional passages needing future study and chambers beyond the current project scope. Future study that, 70 years later, has never happened. Chambers whose extent has never been determined. Passages measured at their mouths, and then bricked up with the same finality seen beneath every sealed space at the Vatican, as if the workers were following instructions they didn't fully grasp. Now go deeper into the historical record, because the 1940s digs weren't the first time the Vatican encountered its own basement. They were the first modern, semi-public excavation. But construction and renovation projects over the centuries have repeatedly broken through into underground spaces that were unanticipated, undocumented, and unexplored. The more I dug into St. Peter's architectural history, the more I found references to subterranean discoveries that were handled with consistent, striking speed. During the 16th and 17th century construction of the current Basilica, workers repeatedly came across underground chambers, passages, and structures that predated the Roman necropolis. Structures that, given their depth and the geological layers they were found in, appeared significantly older than the Roman-era cemetery above them. These findings were reported to papal authorities, and case after case, the response was identical: seal it, fill it, build over it, keep building. The pattern repeats with eerie consistency across centuries of Vatican construction records. Every major building project at the Vatican has encountered underground anomalies. Every anomaly has been sealed rather than explored. The uniformity of this response suggests not isolated decisions by individual project managers, but institutional policy. A standing order maintained across papacies, across centuries, across the complete replacement of every person involved in its enforcement. Close any opening to the deeper underground and never peer inside. What institutional priority survives the death of every individual who carries it out? What knowledge, or what fear, is potent enough to be transmitted across 300 years of continuous institutional life without ever being written into an accessible document? Here's where the thread connects to something most people don't know about: the Vatican Secret Archives. The very name provokes a reaction, and the Vatican tried to correct that by officially renaming them the Vatican Apostolic Archives in 2019. The name change was described as a clarification. Secret, in the original Latin, meant private, not hidden. The archives are just the papacy's private documentary collection. Nothing sinister, nothing concealed, except that the archives contain about 53 miles of shelving, 85 kilometers of documents spanning over 12 centuries, and access is limited to credentialed scholars who must apply for permission, specify exactly which documents they want to see, and work under conditions that restrict them to the specific materials approved in advance. You cannot browse. You cannot wander the stacks. You cannot follow a thread from one document to another the way a researcher would in any other archive on Earth. You request a specific item. You receive it. You examine it under supervision. You return it. And you have no way of knowing what else sits on the shelf beside it. That raises a simple but critical question: what is in 53 miles of documents that demands this level of controlled access? The official answer is administrative records, papal correspondence, church governance files, the bureaucratic output of an institution that has run continuously for nearly 2,000 years. And no doubt the vast majority of those 53 miles are exactly that: mundane, administrative, tedious. But the access restrictions aren't calibrated to the boring material. They're calibrated to everything. The system doesn't distinguish between a 14th century grain receipt and whatever else might be on the adjacent shelf. The restriction is total, applied uniformly, shielding the routine and the extraordinary with the same opacity. The more I dug into the archive's history, the more I found accounts of scholars who had been granted access and who reported finding documents that raised more questions than they answered. References to earlier documents absent from the catalog. Cross-references to materials housed in sections the scholar's permission didn't cover. Gaps in chronological sequences where documents should exist but don't. And, in several documented cases, materials accessible during one visit were reported as unavailable later, as if the act of examining them had prompted their removal from circulation. The silence was deafening. Now connect the underground to the archives, because these aren't separate stories. They're the same story. The sealed tunnels and the restricted documents are two expressions of the same institutional behavior: control of access, control of knowledge. The determination, preserved across centuries, that certain things under the Vatican and certain things within the Vatican's documentary record will remain forever out of reach of anyone outside the institution. And here's where the question becomes truly unsettling. What does the Vatican know about what lies beneath it? Because the Vatican didn't end up on Vatican Hill by accident. Constantine chose the site specifically because tradition held that Saint Peter was buried there. But Vatican Hill was significant before Peter. It was significant before Christianity. It was significant before Rome. The hill was a sacred site in pre-Roman Italian religion. The very name Vaticanus may derive from the Latin vaticinare, to prophecy. Vatican Hill was tied to prophecy, to oracular traditions, to the kind of sacred knowledge that predates the institutional religions that later claimed the site. Go examine the archaeological record of Vatican Hill before Constantine. You'll find layers Roman necropolis on top. Beneath that, earlier Roman structures. Beneath that, pre-Roman sacred sites. And beneath that, layers that have never been fully excavated. Because every excavation has stopped at the point where findings begin to predate the narratives the institution above is built upon. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision, because this isn't unique to the Vatican. Across the ancient world, the holiest sites of major religions sit atop older sacred sites. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem rests on foundations that predate the Hebrew Temple. The Kaaba in Mecca is built around a stone that predates Islam. The great cathedrals of Europe are built on sites sacred to pre-Christian religions. Historians acknowledge the pattern. What they don't acknowledge is what it implies: that the sacredness of these sites predates the religions that claim them. That something about these specific locations was recognized as significant by cultures that existed before the cultures we know, and that the newer institutions, rather than investigating what made those sites sacred to their predecessors, built on top of them and sealed what lay underneath. Here's the thread I keep pulling. The Vatican sits on a hill that was sacred before Rome. It built a basilica atop a cemetery that was ancient before the basilica. It sealed tunnels and chambers that extend beneath that cemetery into layers that predate the Roman presence. It maintains 53 miles of documents under access restrictions that prevent comprehensive independent study. And it has done all of this continuously, consistently, across 3 centuries of sealed underground passages and 8 centuries of archived documents, without ever explaining what it's protecting, or why. I'm not saying the Vatican is hiding the Holy Grail. I'm not saying there's an alien artifact under St. Peter's. I'm asking something simpler and more disturbing. I'm asking what's in the tunnels that were sealed in the 1700s and never reopened. I'm asking what the 1940s excavation team found in the passages they measured and then bricked up. I'm asking what's in the sections of the archives no scholar has ever been allowed to see. I'm asking why an institution that claims to be a guardian of truth runs the most elaborate system of information control in the Western world. I'm asking what's beneath the Vatican that has stayed beneath the Vatican for 300 years. Go look at St. Peter's floor plan. Look at the scale. Now imagine what's underneath it. Not the necropolis you're allowed to see, but below that. The layers every construction project has encountered, and every papal authority has ordered sealed. The chambers that appear on the 17th century architectural drawings, but not on modern maps. The passages that lead somewhere the institution, sitting on top of them, has decided you will never go. The deeper I went, the more I realized that the most heavily guarded secret in the Vatican isn't a document, a relic, or a theological revelation. It's a direction down. Every security measure, every access restriction, every sealed doorway, every bricked-up tunnel, every century of institutional silence points the same way. Down beneath the Basilica, beneath the Necropolis, beneath the Roman and pre-Roman layers, into a depth no independent investigator has ever reached and no institutional authority has ever explained. What's down there? Not what the tour guide tells you. Not the approved necropolis. Not the bones they say are Peter's. Below that, in the tunnels they sealed when your great-grandparents were alive, and that remains sealed today, kept in darkness by an institution that has outlived every empire, every government, every rival authority that has ever existed in the Western world. An institution that has survived for 2,000 years by controlling what people are permitted to know. Ask yourself, what knowledge is worth 2,000 years of control?